Welcome to the Fiddlesticks Champion Review. I'm your host, Ruko, and in this video, we'll be covering my 4-point rating system of gameplay, aesthetic, lore, and theme, rating them from 1 to 5, with 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. We'll also cover Fiddlesticks' role, his pros and cons, and then hand down a verdict at the end. For the sake of simplicity, I'll be referring to Fiddlesticks as he, despite it being a genderless monster. Starting off with gameplay, this aspect represents how fun and interesting he is to play, and added points for a unique kit with a lot of depth. His passive is a harmless scarecrow. Instead of a trinket, Fiddle's got handy-dandy effigies of himself that he can plop down, which grant vision and reveal nearby wards at level 6. If enemies get near it, the clone does a random action, like flashing away, ulting at the enemy, walking toward them, pretending to be you, neat stuff like that. Also, standing still makes Fiddle look just like his clones, so you can use it for mind games if you're real tricksy. But I don't recommend it, because the way Riot designed him, he's a pretty bad duelist in the early game, and a mediocre one in the mid to late game. This means that the enemy doesn't have that much to worry about, even if they do face check the real Fiddlesticks instead of the ward. Basically, if Fiddle is weak, his ward will also be weaker because there's less psychological pressure. Technically, his effigies are considered clones, meaning they can block projectiles, but I swear it takes a second or two before an effigy can block anything, because I've tested this out with very little success. One last note is that the effigies scale very hard, lasting 300 seconds and recharging every 30 seconds at max level. You can have 10 Fiddle effigies out in the late game. Insane! That by itself basically classifies him as a late game champ, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Fiddle's Q is Terrify, a point-and-click fear that deals 6 to 10% current health damage, but also passively makes all your other abilities cause fear if you're unseen and out of combat for 2.5 seconds. If you fear an enemy like this, instead of causing another fear, your Q's current health damage is doubled, which can get as high as 20% current health. This generally means you should use it after fearing the enemy out of vision with your other abilities, or use it at the beginning of the fight 90% of the time, so you can make use of the current health damage. Try fearing large jungle monsters with your E and W out of a bush or over a wall to get the empowered Q damage to speed up your jungle clear. Spoilers, he's a jungler. The passive fearing synergizes extremely well with Fiddle's ult, but we'll get to that soon. Fiddle's W is Bountiful Harvest, and it sucks. I'm not sorry. Fiddle tethers himself to all enemies around him and channels for 2 seconds, sucking out their soul. This damages enemies and heals for a percentage of the pre-mitigation, and deals a burst of damage on the last tick for 12 to 22% of their missing health. This generally means you want to use this ability last to finish them off. The caveat is that the heal is reduced to 15% against minions, meaning that he's a lot better in the jungle than in lane, since he gets the full heal on jungle monsters. Also, with proper positioning, you can actually do red buff and raptors at the same time with your W. Same goes with Gromp and blue buff, meaning your early clear can actually be pretty fast despite his lackluster early damage. Unfortunately, any CC aside from slows interrupt this ability, which could make it exceedingly hard to get off the last tick of damage against CC heavy team comps. That is, unless you time your own CC perfectly. By making his W affect all enemies around him but decreasing its single target damage, Riot effectively made him even more amazing in teamfights, but lackluster in a 1 versus 1. Fiddle's E is Reap. He swings his scythe in a crescent shape, slowing all enemies hit, and also silences them if he hits the round sweet spot in the middle. This ability has just okay damage, but provides a lot of utility and sticking power. Pretty simple ability, but they don't all have to be a million paragraphs to be useful. Fiddle's ultimate is Crowstorm. It's virtually the same as his old ult, but the damage ticks faster, every 2.5 seconds to be specific. This ability is still integral to Fiddle's game plan, even more so than before. With the passive from his Q, Fiddle's ult can potentially fear the entire enemy team for 2 seconds at max Q rank, which is pretty crazy. It's also his most damaging ability by far, making it vital to have up if you want to win a duel or turn the tide of a team fight. As for role, Fiddle is most definitely a jungler. I see people building him the same way that old Fiddlesticks was built, but right now I feel like he plays more like a sustained damage bruiser rather than a burst mage. The scaling on his abilities is already pretty limited, and his W and Q deal percent health damage, which Riot gives to a lot of tanks to help them deal damage. Pair that with his space damage already being pretty good, especially on his ultimate. I personally think off tank is actually the best build for him overall. Blue Smite into Rylai's Crystal Scepter into Liandry's Torment, followed by a resistance item like Abyssal Mask, then finishing your jungle item with Cinder Hulk, and then another resistance item last. Deadman's Plate actually synergizes pretty well, since if you never auto-attack anyone, you'll always have the extra movement speed, which will make chasing down enemies with your ult a lot easier. But who knows, maybe I'll eat my words in a week when some pro player comes out with an insane burst Fiddle build. But one thing I'm fairly sure of is that Rylai's is core on him. Maybe Liandry's too, due to the sustained nature of his dueling pattern. A full AP build definitely carries harder though if you're insanely fed, and if you do go that route, Zhonya's is now your core instead, to avoid getting insta-killed. For runes, I take Aftershock, Font of Life, Conditioning, and Revitalize, followed by either Ravenous Hunter or Ultimate Hunter. I could see an argument for both, and I'm not sure which one's better. For full AP, Dark Harvest, Cheap Shot, Eyeball Collection, and once again, Ravenous Hunter or Ult Hunter, followed by Nimbus Cloak, and either Water Walking or Gathering Storm depending on your personal preference. As a final note, he might still be a decent support since his new kit provides a lot of utility. My overall thoughts on Fiddle is that he's a very well designed champion, for the most part. There are some hiccups like his passive being hard to use for mind games due to the lack of dueling power, and the fact that standing still in plain sight and pretending to be an effigy works contrary to his Q passive, and getting that last tick of W to finish off the enemy can be tough sometimes. But personally, I think he's really fun to play. He has a lot of situational power when you use his abilities in the right order at the right time, and I think his kit is deep enough that maining him may reveal further secrets over time. Some people are saying that he's on the weaker side of things, but I honestly don't think so. I'd say give it some more time, stop playing Fiddle like the old Fiddlesticks, learn his quirks, learn his strengths and weaknesses, and I'm sure you'll be rewarded. With all that said, Fiddle's gameplay gets an excellent 4 out of 5. Moving on to aesthetic. In this category, we'll be covering a few things. Fiddle's splash art, animations, and voice lines. Bonus points if their theme, music, or related content is good. So, there's a lot to unpack here. I'll go over the things I like, some of the stuff I don't like, and things I find interesting. They clearly put a lot of effort into making this splash look as monstrous and dangerous as humanly possible. Every piece of this scrap iron scarecrow looks sharp, and those teeth! Holy hell, if you got teeth like that, why isn't Fiddle biting his enemies to death? By the way, the scarecrow itself is not Fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks is that massive black goo and orange eyes in his stomach that extends out of his back. You can also see it extending out through his arm, like the demon inside is clumsily wrapping around the metallic joints to move the body. That'll become even more clear when we talk about the animations. I also like the smashed lantern on the ground, implying that just a second ago he was pretending to be a normal scarecrow and now he's given up the ruse and is coming after you. It's a nice little detail. Speaking of details, he's got 2 keys around his neck. Why? I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the lower section of this review. I think my biggest gripe with this splash is just that I wish it emphasized the dread aspect of Fiddlesticks more than the horror. I would have liked a splash that was more nuanced and made me tense rather than just thinking, oh, spooky monsters coming at me. But I'm not a designer, so maybe I'm asking for too much. It's a great splash, and nevertheless. It only gets better from here, folks. Fiddle's animations are godlike. From the way he drags his scrap iron arm behind him to the spider monkey shit nightmare feel he does when he ults. Right? Knocked it out of the park and into outer space. Remember when I said Fiddle isn't the scarecrow but the demon inside? Well, nothing makes this more apparent than Fiddle's recall animation, where the red essence literally leaves this body and picks up the scarecrow husk and pulls it to the fountain. I also want to take a closer look at the E animation. You can see Fiddle heaves his arm and scythe and the momentum tugs at him, almost turning him around completely, because the demon inside Fiddle is just clumsily controlling a puppet on strings. Pun intended. Anyway, animations are amazing. Moving on. Remember when I said it only gets better? Fiddle's voice is... You're not real. A 5 out of 5 masterpiece. So many of these lines gave me actual chills the first time I heard them. The fact that he mimics the voices of people he's killed is just sublime. If he was just a regular gurgly monster or an intelligent killer, it wouldn't even come close to the downright beauty of his current voice lines. I'm in love. I'll play some of my favorites so you can get a better idea. They haven't come back from the fields. It's been 3 days. Nothing to be afraid of. It's hunting us. It knows what we're afraid of. It moves around at night. Help me! Fiddle's aesthetic is basically perfect. It's so good, in fact, that I'd be downright upset if they changed anything. Add in the fact that Fiddle's theme music is a beautifully chilling children's song about staying the hell away from Fiddlesticks, and you have something close to perfection. I give Fiddle's aesthetic a 5 out of 5. This is without a doubt some of Riot's best work. You've already seen a sneak peek at Fiddle's lore when I talked about his aesthetic, but now let's dive a little bit deeper. Obviously I don't have time to go over everything, but I'll go over the most important stuff and things you may not have known. Something has returned. An evil gone from the world for numberless centuries, long enough that the warnings of a nascent humanity passed into rumor, then myth, then legend, until all that remained were simple fables, an entity so utterly alien that it defies almost all contemporary knowledge of magic, so impossibly ancient that it has always been, so universally feared that even animals grow nervous when someone speaks its name. In the wake of this revival, another tale, nearly lost to memory, has seen a resurgence throughout the hinterlands, a legend of a great evil that has no form, no thoughts, and no understanding of the world it inhabits, instead building itself into the crude shape of those that fear it, the terror of all living things, given life in that first terrible scream of creation, a demon before demons were known. His bio further explains that Fiddlesticks appears wherever there's a large concentration of fear, his body forming out of whatever spare parts are lying around to mimic the ones who fear him. Fiddlesticks is the first demon, whatever that means. His voice lines give us a clue.
Fiddlesticks, end of men. Fiddlesticks, first of 10.
There are a few champions who Fiddle actually refers to by name when he encounters them. These are
Evelyn, Nocturne, Tom Kent, Greyman,
aka Kindred,
Raum,
aka the demon within Swain. The theory goes that each of these champions are demons that are somehow connected to Fiddlesticks, but how is unclear. This lore scroll seems to imply their connection comes through them embodying a specific aspect. Fiddlesticks embodies the oldest aspect, fear. Nocturne is nightmares. Tom Kench's obsession, Evelyn is bliss, I think, but doesn't she like torture and kill the men she seduces? I don't know, it's weird. Raum is secrets because Swain lore, and I guess there isn't really a Kindred connection here, but Kindred is death itself, so they've probably been around for as long as Fiddlesticks has, so it makes sense that he'd know about them. Two more noteworthy callouts are Lux being referred to as Little Light, and Fiddle gasping in pain when he sees Soraka. Maybe Fiddlesticks hates light, I don't know. Also, going back to talking about the key around his neck, his bio says this. An old Targonian legend speaks of how a child of twilight stole the only joy from a ragged, whispering horror. A child of twilight, aka Zoe, stole something from a whispering horror, aka Fiddlesticks. I'd bet money that the only joy they're talking about is that their key in Zoe's splash.
Nice key you got there, Twilight. Didn't steal it from someone dangerous, did you?
What are the keys for? Who freaking knows? But they're on the first of 10 lore scrolls, so they must be important, right? My point with all this is to show that there are a lot of fun unknowns when it comes to Fiddlesticks' story. There's some epic-ass lore here. And I'm not the one who's gonna figure it out. I give his lore a 4 out of 5. Moving on to theme. To find out if Fiddle's theme is good or not, we need to first ask whether all the parts of him, gameplay, aesthetic, and lore, fit together under a unifying idea. Fiddlesticks' entire theme is fear, who would have guessed. Riot designed him solely with that in mind to make him the scariest champion in the game. Did they succeed? Yes, I think they did. Kinda. Let me ask you a question. What's more scary, a Kha'Zix jumping out of a bush or a Fiddle? My point with that statement is that the lack of dueling power actually hurts Fiddle's core theme of fear. There's a disconnect with his aesthetic and lore, and his gameplay. The effigies that occupy his ward slot aren't scary because even if it's the real Fiddlesticks standing still and not a ward, he'll deal less damage if he attacks you because his passive only works when he's out of vision, and you'll probably win the fight anyway because you're either a laner with more farm and XP or a jungler with better dueling potential. Fiddlesticks is amazing in a teamfight, but on his own, he's not all that scary, and that's a real shame. His saving grace is that his passive does encourage you to ambush, which does fit with his theme. It just doesn't all fit together as neatly as one would hope. Fiddlesticks' theme is solid, but flawed in some important areas. A 3 out of 5. I doubt anyone will be surprised to hear me say this, but I love the Fiddlesticks rework. He's fun, he's spoopy, and he's endlessly fascinating as a character. I look forward to spending many more hours with this champion, and here's hoping he doesn't turn out to be OP and they remove all the cool aspects of him later. Looking at you, Akali. Looking at you, Aurelia. The Fiddlesticks rework is a fantastic addition to League's growing list of updated champions, and I give it 4 out of 5. Thanks for watching this video. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. I mostly do weekly League of Legends and Legends of Runeterra gameplay videos in addition to variety content, but I'd like to do more champion reviews in the future for Riot's future champions and reworks. And if that interests you, please subscribe. But, until next time, good night, you sweet, bloody bastards. Good night.